It was the dead of winter in Ravenscroft, a remote village nestled deep in the English countryside. Snow blanketed the ground, transforming the town into a silent, frozen wasteland. The old gas lamps along the cobblestone streets flickered weakly, their light swallowed by the pressing darkness. Maggie Fletcher trudged through the snow, her breath curling in the icy air. She clutched her scarf tighter, glancing nervously at the houses around her. Most of them were dark, curtains drawn, doors bolted. She had stayed late at the library, losing track of time as she pored over dusty books on local legends. Now she regretted it. Ravenscroft had a reputation, one Maggie had dismissed as superstition when she moved there a month ago. The locals spoke in hushed tones about the whispering snow, a phenomenon that happened every few years. People claimed to hear voices in the wind during heavy snowfalls, voices that lured the unwary to their doom. Maggie was halfway to her cottage when she heard it, a faint, lilting voice. "Help me." She froze. The voice was distant but clear, cutting through the muffled stillness like a knife. It came from the woods that bordered the village, a place she had been warned never to enter after dark. "Hello?" she called, her voice trembling. The wind picked up, carrying the sound of soft sobbing. It was a child, or at least it sounded like one. Maggie's rational mind screamed at her to keep walking, but she couldn't shake the thought of someone out there, freezing and alone. Against her better judgment, she turned toward the woods. The trees loomed like skeletal sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the sky. Maggie stepped onto the narrow path that cut through the forest, the snow crunching beneath her boots. The sobbing grew louder, pulling her deeper into the shadowy maze. "Where are you?" she called. "Here." The voice was closer now, behind a dense thicket of brambles. Maggie pushed through, the thorns snagging her coat and tearing at her gloves. On the other side was a small clearing. A child stood in the center, barefoot and shivering in a thin nightgown. Her hair was dark and tangled, her face obscured by shadow. Maggie's heart clenched. "Sweetheart, what are you doing out here? Are you lost?" The child didn't respond. She lifted her head and Maggie gasped. The girl's eyes were black, voids that reflected nothing. Her lips moved, but the words were not her own. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was deep, guttural, and entirely inhuman. Before Maggie could react, the girl's form shimmered and dissolved into a swirl of snowflakes. The wind roared, and the whispers began in earnest. Dozens of voices, overlapping and chaotic, filled the air. "Stay with us. Don't leave. Forever." Maggie turned and ran, her pulse hammering in her ears. The path she had followed was gone, buried beneath fresh snow. The trees closed in, their branches twisting unnaturally. She stumbled, falling face first into the snow. When she looked up, she was no longer in the forest, but back in the village square. Relief washed over her until she noticed the eerie stillness. The gas lamps were extinguished, and the snow fell heavier than before, muffling all sound. Then she saw them, figures standing in the distance, motionless and silent. They lined the edges of the square, their features obscured by the snow. "Maggie," she spun around. The voice came from behind her, soft and familiar. It was her mother's voice, though her mother had been dead for years. "Come here, darling." Maggie's breath hitched as one of the figures stepped forward, its face finally coming into focus. It was her mother, but wrong. Her eyes were empty sockets, her skin pale and cracked like old porcelain. Maggie backed away, but the figures closed in from all sides. She tried to scream, but the cold stole her voice. The whispers grew deafening, consuming her entirely. By morning, the snow had stopped. The townsfolk found no trace of Maggie, only a single set of footprints leading into the woods, and none coming out. In Ravenscroft, the snow whispered once more.